Kevin, why don't you come on up and tell us all about what we need to know about birds, houses, birds.
Thank you very much. This is actually my second time here. I don't know if you guys remember, it's been about, I don't know, a year and a half, maybe 2 years ago now, when I was invited up to talk about my time in Afghanistan and in Iraq. But my name is Kevin Anderson. Do I need to stand in a certain spot?
No.
For the camera? My name is Kevin Anderson, and I own the Wild Birds Unlimited in Snellville, Georgia, along with my wife, Cindy. It's good to see, Dan, it's good to see some familiar faces here. I know some of you folks shop at our store, and we appreciate that. But I'm very happy to be here this morning to speak to you about nesting boxes and the importance that they play in promoting the health of the species, of various species of birds. So let me see. We're not, yeah, we can go ahead and set that up. Now, when we talk about nesting boxes and nesting behavior of birds, we need to understand how it fits into the overall scheme of promoting wildlife in your backyard. That's basically what we do at Wild Birds Unlimited. We help you turn your backyard space or your personal property into a wildlife habitat. And we primarily focus on birds, but other animals, we also want to promote that with other animals as well. When it comes to birds, the important aspects of promoting a good environment for birds, there's basically 4 elements. One is to have a good source of food, a good source of clean water, cover where they can escape and evade predation from various animals and other birds, and a place for them to raise their young, which of course that's where the nesting box comes into play. Now, I know all of you know this, not all birds use nesting boxes. Some birds are what we call cup nesters. In other words, they'll build a nest in a tree branch, and we've all seen that. Cardinals are one of those, one of the more popular birds. Goldfinch do that. Hummingbirds are cup nesters. But there are also several birds that build nests in cavities, or nesting boxes, or what we call cavities. And the number one bird, at least from a business perspective, that we accommodate in that aspect are eastern bluebirds. The eastern bluebird is a real success story as far as the way people have actually brought them back, I don't know if to say from the brink of extinction, but brought them back from very, very low numbers to very, very robust populations, and they're growing all the time. And that's primarily due to the fact that people have been, for the last 2 or 3 decades or more, putting out nesting boxes to promote their populations. And the reason for that is a bluebird is what we call a secondary cavity dweller. In other words, it nests in an existing cavity, usually a hollow tree, maybe an old woodpecker nest, an abandoned woodpecker nest, or anywhere where it can find a cavity to get down into. Well, in years gone by, deforestation, the cutting of trees, urban sprawl has taken away a lot of that habitat. But the introduction of nesting boxes for bluebirds, as we said, has brought them back significantly. So as we talk today, our focus will be primarily on bluebirds, but we'll talk about other birds as well. Let me say this, if at any point during the conversation you have a question, just feel free to stop me. I'll be more than happy to answer it. Let me say this, I'm not an ornithologist. I always have to give that disclaimer. I own a bird food store, and I'm a hobbyist, so I know quite a bit about birds and their habits, but I'm not, when we start getting into the genomes and all that kind of stuff, we may have to go to the reference material for that. So anyway, When we talk about Bluebird Habitat, a nesting box, I brought a few examples of nesting boxes up here, and we'll just, we'll start with the basic nesting box here. This is one of my personal favorites. This, by the way, is a picture from my backyard. Oh, there it is, thank you. This is, this is from last year, I guess. That's a mother bluebird, and she's got some babies in that box that she is getting ready to feed. And you can't, I don't know if you can see it, but if you look real close, she's got a bill full of mealworms, live mealworms that we feed them. Bluebirds are primarily insectivores. They will eat berries in the wintertime, but for the most part, throughout the summer, spring and summer, they will hang around open fields and areas and look to pick up all sorts of insects, everything from crickets to spiders to worms, any kind of worm they can find. We happen to sell mealworms. We sell a lot of mealworms, especially during nesting season, because it is a favorite food of eastern bluebirds, as well as many other birds as well. As I tell people, it's kind of like a steak dinner for a bird. But that's a female bluebird going into a box where she's feeding her young. Bluebirds generally nest 2 to 3 times a year. Under certain circumstances, they can nest maybe 4 times a year. My personal experience with them, I've only had 3 nestings in my particular yard in a single year, and I normally have 2. A lot of that is determined by weather conditions. If we have a really cold winter that's prolonged, they may start later in the year. If winter comes early, they may cut off. Their season may be cut short. This past year, I'll say this, and it usually starts in early March, early to mid-March. This past year, we were having people having eggs being laid as early as February because of the very warm winter that we had this past year. So I would think if this warming trend continues, we may very well see extended nesting seasons for a number of birds. But bluebirds, 2 to 3 times a year, they usually lay about 5 eggs. They can lay, as I've read, as many as 7. I've never personally seen that. I have had a customer bring in a picture where they had 6 eggs in a box, but usually 4 to 5 eggs is the normal for them. They'll sit on the eggs for about 2.5 weeks, and then once the eggs hatch, they will be in the box about 18 to 19 days, and then the babies will fledge. So anyway, that's mother bluebird feeding. There she is again. That particular box is made of red cedar. That's just, as you can see, it's just a basic box. That this year, well, let's see, I've been in the house 13 years. I put it in. This will be, I guess, the 13th season that box has been in my backyard. That's the second box that I have in my yard, which is this one. Let's talk about some of when you're building a box primarily for bluebirds, let's talk about some of the characteristics of it that you need. First and foremost, the size of the hole. It's recommended you have a hole 1 inch, not to exceed 1.5 inches in diameter. And the reason for that is because there are certain predators out there, primarily, I say predators, the European starling, which is an introduced species that competes with bluebirds for nesting space. So they will outcompete them. They're very aggressive birds. You may or may not have seen them. I've got some pictures up here I'll show you in a few minutes of them. They were introduced from Europe in the 1800s to New York City. There was someone, the way the story goes, there was an individual or a group of people that wanted to bring all the birds from Europe that are found in Shakespearean plays into Central Park. So they brought a number of different birds over and released them in Central Park, and now they've taken, I say they've taken over. They've done very well in North America. And for those of you that feed birds, you know what I'm talking about. The starlings, they will eat you out of house and home. They compete with bluebirds for nesting space. So one of the ways that you can, dissuade a starling from getting into a nesting box is limiting the size of the hole to 1.5 inches. Okay, so that's number one. Number two is you want to have about 6.5 inches, and you can find all this information on the North American Bluebird Society's webpage. About 6.5 inches of depth from the bottom of the hole down to the bottom of the box, 6.5 inches. And the reason for that is bluebirds, they will build a nest primarily out of pine needles, is what I find in my yard. Whenever I go and open the box, if it's pine needles, I know it's a bluebird, if I haven't actually observed the bird. And that gives the babies a certain degree of protection from any sort of predator that may want to come in and snatch them out, to get them out. So it gives a little bit of depth to the box. Now on the inside of the box, it's important to have, open this up. This particular box, as you can see, is made of cedar, and the bark is left on it. The birds love this thing. If it's a rough surfaced wood, then you don't really need to put anything on the inside of the box to help the babies get out. If it's a more smooth wood, then perhaps putting a little grate, a little steel grate, and I'll show that on some of the other boxes here. A little steel grate to help them climb out, or maybe using
hardwood cloth. Hardwood cloth.
Something like that, or just putting some little routing, some little curves in there, just to give them something to grip onto. This one has nothing, doesn't need anything, and it works well. Now, the clean out port is very, very important for a box, due to the fact that once the bluebirds fledge, you don't want them using the same nesting material. Some people think, well, okay, they'll just come back and use the same nest. No, they'll come back and build a nest on top of the previous nest, and that creates a number of problems. One, it now puts the babies up at a level to where you can, actually see them, and a squirrel could come up, potentially reach in, snatch them out, or a raccoon. It makes it easier for predators to get to them. It makes it easier for the baby to get out of the box before he's ready to fledge. That's another aspect of it. Keeping it low where they're not, able to get out until they're actually ready to fly. So that's another component of it. So whenever, there's also aspects, or there's also things to consider. Parasites. Mother bluebirds and father bluebirds are very good about keeping the nest clean, but they can get bugs, and they can get parasites in there. So cleaning that nesting material out after the babies fledge promotes a healthier environment for them, and the parents will generally come back within a couple of weeks or so and start rebuilding another nest and having their second clutch of eggs, or laying their second clutch of eggs. The birds, they use boxes for nesting. They don't live in them. It's not like like we go home every night after a day of work. No, they don't live in them. They use them for nesting for nesting, and then like mom and dad, when they're not nesting in the wintertime, they'll perch in a tree, they'll roost. There are some occasions, if it's extremely cold, sometimes they will get in the box out of, just to get in out of the elements, but they're not going to build a nest for that. They'll just use it. They could potentially use it to get in out of the elements in extreme weather. But no, they don't live in the box year round. They use it for the specific purpose of nesting, and then when it's not nesting season, generally they leave it alone. One of the biggest misconceptions I see when folks put out a nesting box is they want to put it real close to the food to make it real easy for birds to have access to food. No, that's not a good thing to do. And here's why. It creates pressure on the parents. When you put food there, the other birds don't realize, oh, this is just for the bluebirds. The rest of you stay away. No, other birds are going to come in and want to eat that food, and that creates a lot of pressure. You're actually, inviting other birds into the parent space where they're wanting stay somewhat secluded from other birds and potential predators. So you want to try to put as much as possible your food source away from where the birds are nesting. Now let's talk about that. Bluebirds, this particular box is in the back of my yard. It's about 95 feet from my patio to that back fence line. That's my back fence. And on the other side of those cedar trees is pasture land. I've got just optimum bluebird habitat because I've got trees, I've got open fields, all within close proximity in my yard. So that box is about, I don't know, 85, 90 feet from my patio, and then it's about 60 feet from my feeder stations. So what you'll see and what's going on right there, that's a male. When they're nesting and when they're feeding their young, I'll go out and put my mealworms out, and the birds, they'll create it's really cool to watch. They'll create like a relay, mom and dad going back and forth. You saw mom earlier with a mouthful of worms. She'll take a bunch of worms, take them out while she's feeding. Dad comes to the feeder, he's loading up. She comes out, he goes in, and they'll do that, over and over again. So you want to set the box up somewhat in an open area, but relatively close access to trees for when the babies come out, they've got a place to fly to. You don't want them, just flying down to the ground where they can get hit by a predator. You want them to fly, have a place where they can go to get in some trees. But somewhat in an open area, about 5 to 6 feet up is a really good height for bluebirds. Bluebirds are known, they'll go in a cavity as low as 2 feet off the ground, and in some cases as high as 50 feet up in a tree. But an ideal height is about 5 to 6 feet off the ground. They like that a lot. A secure pole is a good way to do it. I've seen bluebirds that will nest in a box that's hanging and swinging. I'm not saying they won't use the box like that, but having a good secure box like on a post, you can put one on a tree, although I don't recommend that for specific reasons. But having it secured is very, very good. As you'll notice on this particular pole, I've got a baffle, and that's to help keep predators out of the box. And the primary predators I'm talking about that a baffle will dissuade are squirrels, raccoons in some cases, and snakes, believe it or not. Snakes are a huge problem for bluebirds, where they get in and they'll eat the eggs and or the babies. So putting a baffle on the pole keeps them, keeps the squirrels from getting up into the box. Will keep raccoons as well, and snakes. You want it turned away from the prevailing wind. So, generally speaking, I hear a lot of people say, well, you need to face the box east. Well, that's not a bad idea, but it's not 100% true. It just so happens in my yard, my box are facing east, but that's just because of the orientation of where my patio is. But you want them faced away from the prevailing wind, and you want them to where they can get some sunlight and warm up during the day. Yes, sir?
What's a baffle?
We've got a number of different styles, but Mr. Brokaw's right. We've got a number of different styles. That's just one of the styles we have that I happen to have on that box in my backyard. But we've got a number of different styles. But yeah, it's very, very important. You can go and put a box on a tree. It's a very natural environment for the birds to use, and they'll use it. I'm not saying that it's a bad thing, but you're just increasing your chances of losing your babies to predation, significantly. When I invest the time and, my goal is to promote the species. It's not to feed snakes and squirrels and raccoons. Not that I know they got to eat, but they can go find something else to eat. So when I invest the time and the energy and the money into it, I want to do everything I can to, reduce the chances of having predators get into them.
What's the distance that this bluebird likes to his neighbor bluebird?
Well, when you read optimally, 100 yards. They say with eastern bluebirds, it could be as far as 125 to 150 yards. If you're going out, if you're reading on setting up a bluebird trail, they would say put your boxes 100 yards apart. Now, you know, I've got multiple boxes in my backyard. I try to put, and I've got a pretty good sized backyard, I try to put as much distance as I can between my boxes. I have, I'm going to say about 30 yards between each box, and that's worked pretty well. I've had other people say, I've got boxes as close as 15 or 20 feet and birds are using them. So, you know, there's nothing absolutely exact. You know, this is nature. There's, you know, they adapt, they do things differently. But the official word is 100 yards. It can be less, but, and again, that creates, it takes competitive pressure off of them. I've had 2 nestings at one time in my backyard. I've never had 3. I've got 3 boxes. I've never had 3, but I've had 2 at one time, and those boxes are about 30 yards apart. And it was those 2 boxes that you saw right there. You want the box to have to be pretty much watertight, but have some ventilation as well. You can see like little cracks up here where air can pass through, and we talked about the clean out feature. So here's another variation on the standard Bluebird box, and this one has a feature. Oh, one of the other things I wanted to say. One of the things you don't want to do with a Bluebird box is put a post on it, or a perch. And the reason for that is, first of all, bluebirds don't need them. You see how they cling to the box. And a perch promotes another bird, the house sparrow, which is an introduced species. We call it's often called an English sparrow. It's another introduced species that is very aggressive in their nesting habits and will actually kill, will destroy eggs and kill birds. So by taking the post off, you again dissuade that house sparrow from potentially using the box. But this one has another feature on it. You see it's got a raised area around the hole, and it also has some metal around it. So what that's designed to do is, if you think about like a squirrel or a raccoon trying to reach in and grab, that extended area right there makes it harder for them to bend their, I don't know if they call it an elbow, but we'll call it an elbow, where they can't get down there and get the babies. This, quite often, we often see people come in where, they've got their box on a pole without a baffle, where squirrels have just chewed out the hole around here trying to get into them. So that's what the metal is for. That kind of helps there. If you put a baffle on your pole, you don't have to worry about that. Now this one has this is a little bit fancier, has a couple of features. It has your clean out port, and here we showed this one does have, see a little metal grate in here to help the birds climb out. Also has a little post here, you can put that on there to give it a little ventilation. But this one has a clean out port on this side, and here on this side it has a viewing port that has a plastic on it. Now you say, well, why do you need that? Well, when the birds start getting close to fledging, you have to be very, very careful, because sometimes you can go out and take a peek in the box and boom, the baby comes out. The babies will come out, and they've come out a day or 2 or 3 days before they maybe should have. So that the viewing side on there allows you to take a look at them without fear of the birds actually coming out of the box. So that's just another feature. Again, that one's made of cedar. It works really well. One of our more popular selling boxes.
Question for you. You should talk about vents at the top. Is there any venting at the bottom?
If you'll look underneath, the way they're set up, they've got they cut little angles on the sides here, You know, you could, if you wanted to maybe put some vent holes in the bottom, you could do that as well. But they have angled, angled on the side where air can pass through and drain, water potentially drain out. But you see they've got these little cut in here.
Another question.
Yes, sir.
So you got the viewing part, doesn't bother the birds if you go in there to look at?
No, I mean, you don't need to abuse it. You don't need to be out there like 3 or 4 times a day looking at them. But I always go out and check. You kind of quietly go out, take a look. Mom and Dad, they'll fly up and, sit in the tree there, and, yeah. Bluebirds generally, in my experience, aren't as aggressive as some other birds. Mockingbirds are very aggressive. Bluebirds, for the most part, compared to a lot of other birds, are somewhat passive, in my experience anyway. So they'll tolerate a certain degree of you checking on them. You don't want to be in there touching them, try not to do that. And like I said, go out and look. One of the things that always has happened to me is they seem to fledge early in the morning. Because I'll go out and I'll check on them. When they start getting close, I'll check. And when I know they're getting close, I'm very, very careful. I'll just kind of crack the door open and peek in a little bit and say, yep, it's going to be close. And the next morning, they'll be gone. So it seems, I don't know if there's a specific time that they like to leave the nest, but they always seem to leave the nest like early in the morning. At least my experience. This is another kind of cool thing to do. This box is using repurposed wood. These are all functional. This is somewhat more decorative, but this is from an old barn. This company took an old barn and took the wood and cut it and used it, to build a box. The metal is obviously from the roof. They even put a horseshoe on it here, just to kind of give it a thematic element. And you can make a box really decorative. But you also want to maintain the functionality of it as well. We sell boxes that churches that look like churches, prairie homes, all kind of different things.
Is there any insulation under the metal, or does there need to be?
No, there really doesn't need to be. No, there isn't. That brings up a good point, though. One of the problems with any kind of nesting box is you'll get wasp nests in them. Sometimes you'll go out, and check them out, say at the beginning of the season, and red wasp have built nest inside the box. Well, how do I get rid of them once they're in there? How do I get rid of them? Well, a good thing that you can do with your box to avoid that is to take a bar of soap and go up onto the roof and around the top sides and rub it with soap. And that creates a surface that's slick that the nest can't adhere to, and that'll help avoid wasps getting in your boxes.
How do you clean that one up?
It's got a screw on the back that you take out, and the bottom drops out of it. This particular, I bought these from a company last year, and they're out of Washington State. I actually did a lot of education to kind of help educating, because they were more about building boxes, didn't really frankly know as much about. The stuff looks cool, but it wasn't as functional as it could have been, so we talked about like placement of the hole and putting a clean out port. So they made some modifications for us so we could take advantage of both. Sometimes you go to shows, you'll go to places, and they got these really, really cool boxes that would look better like on your mantle or as a decoration in your house, don't really function as a real working nesting box. Those are some babies. That box you're looking at, those are some babies in the nest. Those are probably about 5 days old. And if you look real close, you see right here, see right there, see right there. Those are some of the mealworms that got away that Mom, was putting in there feeding. Those are live mealworms. I brought some dried ones here today. These are dried mealworms that bluebirds really like, as well as other birds. But far and away, live mealworms are the preferred. If you want to attract bluebirds to your backyard or keep them in your backyard, putting up a good nesting box and putting out mealworms is a great way to do it. And we sell a We sell a lot of mealworms.
That's an Army snack, isn't it?
I was Navy, so I spent a lot of time with the Army, though.
Question,
Yes, sir.
when the baby bird leaves,
Yes, sir.
is that it?
No, as a matter of fact, oh gosh, these are great segues. No. So this is what you can expect. This is what you can expect when the babies fledge. Okay. Mom and dad have been coming back and forth feeding the babies in the nest, right? Babies fledge, boom, they disappear. Where did the babies go? Well, they'll be sitting up in a tree somewhere, and what you will see now is mom and dad are still coming to your feeder and getting the mealworms, but instead of going back to that nesting box, they're flying up into a tree. And so if you watch real close, you'll be able, to spot them up there. They'll do that for, I don't know, a week or so. And then, and this is one of the coolest things about raising or about nesting, they will bring them to the feeder station. So if you look right here, there's dad. This is my backyard, by the way. There's dad, there's mom, and you see real close, she's got a mealworm in her mouth, and this is a juvenile. You can see the difference. His feathers aren't fully developed yet. They will bring those babies to the feeder station, and they will feed them. And there's mom feeding him and there's dad standing. He's in the batter's box, waiting for his turn up at bat. So that's one of the coolest things. Now you've gone from eggs to babies. They fledged, and then now they're coming to your Now they're coming to your feeder station, and then once mom and dad have gotten past that stage, quite often for like into the fall and winter, you will see groups. You'll see 4 or 5 of the siblings basically traveling around together. And they'll generally do that until nesting season when they start breaking off and going and having their own families. But it is the coolest thing. Bluebirds, I just love them. It's the coolest thing to watch. So that's kind of the cycle about the way things go. There's a brown-headed nuthatch. They'll use a nesting box as well. Now let's talk about different birds. I brought a different box in just to show. Not everything is about bluebirds. You can put this is a box that'll be used by chickadees or wrens. This is just another style box. It's got the clean out feature on it as well. But it's designed, not everybody wants to put a box out for bluebirds, although other birds will use these boxes. And I encourage that. If a tufted titmouse or a Carolina wren uses the box, hey, that's okay. The only birds that I would really, as I said, discourage from using the box would be the European starling and the house sparrow. These are invasive species that actually do damage to native bird populations. So those are the only 2 birds that I would say I would discourage that. But if you go out and you've got a titmouse that's nesting in your box, don't tear that. I mean, I wouldn't. You can do what you want, but I wouldn't do it. Carolina wren, cool little bird. They'll use nesting box like that, or they'll use a bluebird box as well. They nest, yeah, they have a habit. They'll put a nest anywhere. I mean, I had one in my backyard. They put it in my daughter's bicycle basket. My youngest daughter's bicycle basket. So, there's things you can do. You can put spikes up in areas. Carolina chickadee, great little bird. They will use the nesting boxes as well. There's just another bird. There's another picture of one. That's on a seed cylinder, which is one of these. This is a food. Talking about dissuading squirrels, this happens to be a seed cylinder that's infused with hot pepper. So you can put this out. Birds don't have taste buds like mammals do, so the pepper doesn't bother them. Whereas if a squirrel or a chipmunk or a raccoon, or actually, I'm going to tell you, I licked one when we first got them in just to see how hot it was. It's hot. I mean, like painfully hot. But these work very, very well for dissuading squirrels on your feeders and mammals on your feeders. It doesn't bother birds at all. And suet is a very important aspect of birds' diets. This is We carry a number of different types of suet in our store. This is our most popular selling suet, and again, it's the hot pepper suet. It's got pepper infused in the suet. Suet is essentially a beef rendered. It's based in beef rendered fat, and you can put anything. We've got suets that have nuts, they have fruit, they have crushed up mealworms in them. So you can mix it with all sorts of things. Peanut butter is an excellent thing to put in them as well. Another issue with bird food is, you know, the litter, the debris that's on the ground underneath your feeder that will actually start growing plants, you know, sunflowers and things of that nature. And what's causing that are the shells on the seed. That's what makes a plant germinate. So how do you get rid of that? Well, you take the shell off. Thus, you get a no-mess blend of seed, such as this. This is our most popular seed blend that we sell in our store. It's called No Mess, No Millet. It's composed of sunflower chips, which is the foundational food of pretty much every seed blend that you'll find. There's going to be either sunflowers in the shell or sunflower chips. This has also got peanuts and chopped tree nuts. So this got a little something for just about everybody. The fact that there are no shells on this product means that there's no debris to go on the ground. If there's no shells to go on the ground, anything that falls to the ground will be edible. So something's going to come along and eat it, whether it's a squirrel or another bird. Some birds are ground feeders. You know, the brown thrasher is a ground feeder. Towhees are ground feeders. Doves are primarily ground feeders. They'll jump up on your, you know, but there's a number of birds. Robins are ground feeders. So there's a number of birds that will feed off the ground. But that's a good solution to those types of issues. And also, you're not paying for shells. None of Wild Birds Unlimited seeds have any fillers in them, which a lot of the things you'll see at the big box stores have a lot of filler in them. None of our seeds have fillers in them, but shells, which is not a filler, it's part of the seed, takes up space and weight. So, you know, in a 5-pound bag like this of, say, black oil sunflower, just straight black oil sunflower seeds, you know, 5 pounds, you may have a half a pound of shells in there, which is something the birds aren't going to eat. And this type of food, you pay for 5 pounds, you get 5 pounds of edible food. So we talked about the habitat, what you need. Food, water, cover, and a place for the birds to raise their young, thus the nesting boxes. We've talked about positioning of the box, primarily for bluebirds, about 5 feet off the ground in somewhat of an open area, facing away from the prevailing winds, and close enough to where they've got somewhere to fly to get, you know, once the babies come out of the box. We talked about that. We talked about baffles to keep predators out. We talked about the size of the hole, the depth, the importance of cleaning out the box. Is there anything else? What I recommend doing is bringing your feeder stations up fairly close to the house, putting your nesting boxes in a somewhat more secluded area, because they're going to use the feeding station pretty much year round. The nesting box is only going to be used basically from spring through the summer for the most part. I'm at an age now where far away I can't see them, you know, unless I'm using my binoculars. So I want to thank you guys for having me here today. We're located, like I said, in Snellville in the Presidential Commons Shopping Center. They're on Scenic Highway where the Home Depot and Kroger's with Lowe's across the street. If you're ever in the area, we would love to have you to come by. Any questions? Thank you very much.